You're listening to This Motorcycle Life, conversations about why we ride. Episode 16, The Discomfort Zone. I'm Bruce Philp. Thanks for listening. Well, no matter how challenging it was for you when you first learned to ride a motorcycle, I'll bet you've got nothing on this episode's guest. Straight on to the world's most challenging roads, with the highest emotional stakes and the most stubborn personal demons, her journey to becoming a rider is a real lesson in putting your heart into it. You'll meet her in a moment, but first let's take care of some housekeeping. As always, I want to acknowledge the support and encouragement of my friends at Eat, Sleep, Ride. The stories in these podcasts are about riders like you and me, and the Eat, Sleep, Ride app is a great way to meet them. I use mine to track rides, discover new roads, and connect with other riders, and all that is free. But you can also upgrade the app to add a crash detection technology called Crashlight. I don't ride without it. You can download the ESR app from the App Store or Google Play, and it might just become your favorite accessory. And as always, I want to say thanks to you for your support and for your iTunes ratings and really generous emails. A special shout-out to Guy Arnone, who you met in episode 7. Guy, who's just traded his Guzzi on a Ducati, gave me a shout-out on his vlog, Meat and Motorcycles, just last week. And I also want to say thanks to a listener, John Del Vecchio from Rochester, New York. John is a riding instructor, and he sent me a copy of a book he's just written on cornering techniques called Cornering Confidence, which is really excellent. I'll include a link in my show notes. I think those Noco Moto guys were right. I really do have the best listeners. Okay, here we go. So, a motorcyclist's comfort zone is a complicated thing. On the one hand, your comfort zone on a bike is safe. We hear over and over that we should ride our own rides and that pushing ourselves, or being pushed, too hard is how we get hurt. Beyond our comfort zones lurks what Hunter S. Thompson vividly called the sausage creature. In our comfort zones, we're in full control. We feel a sense of mastery, and anyway, there are certain pleasures that are only possible there, things like a beautiful view or good company. But on the other hand, our comfort zones can make us complacent. We lose our edge if we never venture beyond them. Riding becomes routine. We don't learn anything. And we can't handle the surprises that are out there waiting for all of us, no matter how familiar the road. If we stay in our comfort zones long enough, the safest place eventually becomes the most dangerous place, even though it's the least thrilling. So, as riders, we live with this paradox, and we try to strike a balance. From one ride to the next, and even from one moment to the next, we make choices about whether today is the day to scare ourselves a little, or to relax and stay in our comfort zones. And eventually, maybe we even come to take them for granted. Well, you're about to meet someone who's never had that luxury. Jessica Stone is a former aid worker and now an entrepreneur living in Central America. She began her riding career on the streets of Monrovia in West Africa, and 6 years later has ridden much of the length of North and South America, an adventure riding resume most of us would be pretty proud of. But that, as you'll discover, is only half of Jess's story. Because for much of that riding career, she had almost no comfort zone, and her fight to earn one and make her ride her own might just make you appreciate yours even more. I reached Jessica Stone at her home in Guatemala. Hey Jess, how are you?
I'm good, Bruce. How you doing?
I'm just fine. How's the weather down there? I always feel like I start these conversations by asking about the weather. I think it's a Canadian thing, but you're in a warm place, so tell me what it's like.
That's fine. The weather right now is great. We're in the dry season here in Guatemala. It's a little bit windy, but it's fantastic riding weather right now.
Well, that'll keep me going for a while. We're snowed in here, so just so you kind of get a clear picture of the contrast and why I would ask that question. Anyway, thanks for giving me something. So look, before we get into the deep stuff, why don't we get you situated for the people listening to this? You currently live in Guatemala, is that right?
Yep, that's right. My husband, Greg, and I, we moved down here about 2.5 years ago now. I'm Canadian. I'm from Toronto. My husband, Greg, he's from Los Angeles. And we rode our motorcycles down from New Orleans, where we were living for the past 2 years.
Oh, wow. I didn't know about the New Orleans part. That's interesting. So tell us a bit about what you're doing there.
Mm-hmm.
I think you said you came originally to do some support with an NGO, but you've also got a business of your own. Is that right?
Exactly. So my husband and I, if I back up a little bit, we met in Africa, in South Sudan, because we are both international aid workers. That's what we both sort of studied in school. And we met in South Sudan in 2011. And we were working for an NGO there, and we ended up moving to Liberia and working there. And after that, we decided it was time for our motorcycle trip. So we did a north to south motorcycle trip, starting in Los Angeles, going up to Canada, and then finishing in Santiago, Chile. And after that, that's when we moved to New Orleans. We were there for 2 years, and I was not loving New Orleans. I was not loving being an American, wanted to go somewhere else. And Greg was offered the opportunity to consult for a nonprofit, a microfinance nonprofit that works with Indigenous women here in Guatemala. And we had passed through here on our trip and just really loved it and thought it'd be a great place and a great move to make for us. So we came down about 2.5 years ago. And I came down with another contract, so I was working remotely. And soon enough, we got our dog, Moxie, our German Shepherd, only a few months into our stay here. And that was a big to-do because I've always wanted a dog, and we just have never been stationary long enough. And finally, Greg and I said, now it's time. We're going to do it. So we got Moxie as a puppy, and it was through that we started our business, Rough on the Road, where we outfit our dogs and other people's dogs with dog apparel, collars, leashes that are made by Indigenous Guatemalan women that we were working with, or Greg was working with, at the nonprofit. So they provide all of the weaving and all of the design. And we back it with durable materials so that they're long lasting and you can take them wherever you need to.
Right. And they're beautiful looking. We don't have a dog, or I would have ordered something right away. They're gorgeous. I'm going to ask you some more about that later on, and we'll definitely include a link in the show notes. But it's just a beautiful product.
Perfect.
So I sort of worked my way back through your sort of summary there, and the part that interests me is the conversation in which Greg proposes, and this is your partner, Greg, now her husband, proposes that you take this long epic ride, and he says that he would love it if you come along, and so I'm curious about what was the plan, and more importantly, what was the catch? Because I think at this point you weren't a rider yet, right?
No, not at all. I wasn't a rider. Greg and I sort of got together at the end of our time in South Sudan, and Greg was offered a job in Liberia that was an accompanied post, so you could bring your significant other. So he asked me to come along, and I said, okay, I'll give it a try. And we moved to Liberia together. We were in Monrovia. And it was a few weeks in where we were getting to know each other more and talking more. And Greg told me about a trip he had taken on his motorcycle in 2009 on a Yamaha Virago. And he started in Los Angeles and he went down to Panama. But because of time and money, he wasn't able to complete the whole north to south trip and get into Chile. So he said this is something that he wanted to do. And while he had done that trip in 2009, he had met a couple on BMWs. I think it was the F650 at the time. And he was on his Yamaha, and he was given the opportunity to try out their bike. He just really loved them. And he really liked the couple that he had met. They were an American couple. And they were working on the road as they were traveling. And he just really liked that idea and really jived with it and thought that's something that he would like to do, have a partner who would ride with him where he could do this experience and have this experience with them. So when he talked to me about it when we were in Liberia, he had mentioned about this and how it would be really cool. And he said, well, he's going to do this trip one way or the other. And he said, I would be welcome to come along, but he refuses to have a pillion. He said, if I want to come along, I have to learn how to ride. And that's where my motorcycle adventure started. So this was in Monrovia. It was the rainy season, so lots of the streets were flooded. Monrovia has sections that are paved and a lot of sections that are unpaved. And if you know anything about West African traffic, it can get very busy and a bit treacherous. So we purchased a 160cc bike to try, and so that Greg could teach me. And looking back, Greg probably was not the best teacher for me. Having your husband or your significant other teach you how to ride, it really can try your patience. I think Greg saw that I was capable, but I just had a whole other thing going on in my mind about riding. When I said yes to coming on the trip and learning how to ride, I thought it was going to be this great experience. And I thought, well, why not? I'd like to see the world and go and do more. And why not do it on a motorcycle? The truth is I didn't even have my driver's license. Growing up in Toronto, I used public transit all the time.
Yeah, sure.
I didn't have a car. I would always use the buses and the subway. So for me to be riding a motorcycle in Monrovia, it was stressful. Let alone being one of the only white women around riding a motorcycle, which is not that common there either. I obviously was in the spotlight. Everybody was watching. Everybody was commenting as I was practicing, as I dropped the bike. They were all staring. So there was always that added anxiety. So when Greg said, "Oh, let's go out and practice today," my first thought was always, "Oh no, these people are going to be watching me. I'm going to make a fool of myself. I'm going to make a mistake." And so it was not an easy learning experience, to the point where I didn't even want to go on the main road. I wanted to just stay on the side streets. I wanted to just practice there and become proficient and just do it there, not go any further. And it got to a point where Greg said he thought that I was ready. So he said, "Let's go on the main road." I said, "No." He said, "Let's go." So he started walking and I was on the bike. And I just got so upset because he kept walking. He refused to stop, and I was yelling at him, and I was telling him, "You need to come back. I'm going to drop the bike. You need to come back. We can't go any further." And as I was talking, though, I was feathering the clutch, and I was sort of walking along with the bike, and eventually I made it home. And I did not feel any sense of relief. I just felt upset about the fact that he had left me and that I just didn't feel accomplished at that point. And it felt like that a lot of the time when I was learning. As much as I really wanted to do this longer trip and I knew that I needed to learn how, it was stressful.
Right. And so if I remember the story correctly, you end up going back to Los Angeles where you buy bikes and start to prepare in earnest for the trip. And it doesn't get any easier, right? I think you mentioned something about wishing for rain. Tell me about that.
Sure, yeah. So when we were in Liberia, I had never seen women riders. Like, I hadn't seen what it was like to ride in America. Greg obviously grew up in Los Angeles, so he was surrounded by bikes all the time. Growing up in Toronto, it wasn't really not something that I really focused on at the time. So I didn't really know what it meant to be a woman rider. The only thing that I knew was what I saw online. So we would be sitting at home in Monrovia, and I would be online looking at Revzilla, purchasing all of the equipment that I needed for my bike, all of the extras and all of my gear. But I only knew it from online. So I would read the blogs about women riders and hear what they had to say about it. And it didn't really connect with me at the time. I felt like they were very different than I was about how they were experiencing it, because I was not having that same experience, learning and feeling the freedom and everything that people talk about when they're learning how to ride. So it was a very different experience for me, being so isolated and just seeing things through the internet, to the point where I didn't really want to be noticed as a rider. So when I purchased my first riding suit, I purchased a Dainese suit that was basically all black. You would never have thought that it was a motorcycle outfit. You would have just thought that I was wearing street clothes. And this was meant to be like a 3-season, like touring suit. So it was my way of sort of stepping back and not looking like a rider, because I didn't feel like a rider. I didn't feel like what the women were talking about. So when we moved to Los Angeles to get ready for the trip, we had saved our money, so we bought brand new BMW bikes. And obviously the smallest bike at the time was the 650, the G650 GS. And so that was going to be my bike. And they had to be BMWs because Greg had this idea that they were going to be the best bikes to ride for a longer trip. And he had the experience of riding the one when he was on his trip. So we were sort of living out his dream. And we went into the dealer and I looked at that thing and I sat on it. And like I could barely get it up from the kickstand. I was not used to the weight. I still felt like my 160cc was huge for me.
Right.
I only had about maybe 2,000 kilometers on that bike, and then I get onto this 650, and I'm in the showroom, and I'm afraid of putting it down on the kickstand because it like just weighs so much. So it was very stressful. Greg rode his bike out of the showroom, obviously. I got them to deliver my bike, mainly because I didn't feel comfortable that it didn't have any of the crash bars on, and basically because I was stalling. I was not ready. So they brought the bike over to Greg's mom's house where we were staying and offloaded it. And we still didn't have the crash bars or anything. So I kept telling Greg, I'm not ready to try it out yet. He was pushing and pushing, like, let's go ride it around the block. Like, you can just walk it and feather the clutch as you go. And I kept saying, no, I need the crash bars on. If it goes over, then we're done for, was my thought. So we waited until all of the extras came and we put them on. And then even then it was like pulling teeth trying to get me to go out for a ride with this bike. Greg would sit on the bike in the garage and just be so excited and be thinking about the trip. And for me, I would be inside the house and I would just be in bed. It was almost like a depression, and I just wanted to sleep. I just wanted to relax, and I felt like I was just overwhelmed. This was going to be a big trip, and I kept thinking, what did I get myself into? And eventually we started doing some smaller trips. We started by going around the block and doing everything that we sort of did in Liberia. Obviously in Los Angeles, things are a lot more regimented in terms of the road, so that was nice. But the freeway was completely off limits. I had never ridden that fast in Monrovia. There was no way I was going to ride that fast in Los Angeles. So everything was on side roads. So we would go from the valley in Los Angeles, we'd go downtown and take the side streets. And that's the way that I sort of learned and practiced. And eventually we did a couple of overnight trips into the parks, to the national parks, just to practice. And the twisties were just, it was a tough way to go. I just didn't know how to balance the bike well. And as much as I had been watching the videos about how to ride, and I even had gone back to Toronto because I needed to get my license. And as a Canadian citizen, I needed to go back there. I did the weekend course and I got my license right before I went to Los Angeles. So I had my license, but I still didn't feel like I was that capable. And it was just a lot of anxiety. And with those trips, I would come back just really wiped. It took a lot out of me. And I don't think I was the best riding partner for Greg at the time.
Yeah. A couple of things strike me about this. One is that some of the things that you talk about being, kind of embarrassed about are things I think lots of people, did. I had my first bike delivered. I think I maybe had my first 2 bikes delivered. And I still hate American freeways. They intimidate the hell out of me. So, it's not so strange, and I wonder how common that is, which I guess we'll talk about a little later on. But the other thing I couldn't help but notice is that you really got thrown into the deep end. I mean, I can't imagine riding in Monrovia. I love to ride in Los Angeles, but it is not the easiest place in the world to ride, in my opinion. And the twisties that you talked about are all fine and dandy if nobody's there to watch you. You could pretend you're going as fast as you want,
Right?
but if you're with somebody, there's kind of nowhere to hide. So sort of a long way of saying, you said to me in an email that you were the rider who used to hope for rain in Los Angeles in July, and that seems like a strong signal to me. And so I have to ask, what kept you going? And by the way, this isn't the last time I'm going to ask you what kept you going, but let's start with California.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. I would wake up and I would just look out the window and hope for rain. It just made no sense, but I just needed something to prevent me from having to go out and practice. And it's something that I sort of did as a child. My father flew model airplanes. He was also a pilot and instructor for small aircraft, and he would get my sister and I out on a Saturday morning and to learn how to fly remote controlled airplanes. I was small. I was 9, 10, 11 at the time. And it was that same feeling. I would look out my window and I would hope for wind so that it would be so windy that we wouldn't be able to go flying. And my dad was great in the sense that he wanted us to go and experience new things and try something and get us out there on the weekend. But for me, it was just such a stressful thing because he was a very strong teacher and he instilled this idea that remote controlled airplanes can be dangerous. You could fly into the area where there are the bystanders. Somebody could get hurt. You could hit a car if you crashed. I think he really instilled a lot of fear in me,
right.
And it created a lot of anxiety. So it got to the point where I would look out my window and hope that it was windy so that I didn't have to go out with him. And it felt almost the same way when I was learning to ride. I would look out and just hope that it'd be raining. And then there's no way Greg could force me to go out riding when it was raining. So it was that same feeling. And what kept me going was, I think, the fear of failure. I did not want to fail at this. I didn't want to give it up. I wanted to see it through. To the point where when we were even on the trip, there were a number of occasions where Greg said, well, look, if this is not working for you, we can stop. We don't have to continue. We can ship the bikes home. You could fly home. You could take a break. He gave me all of these opportunities. And for me, it was, no, we need to keep going. I need to keep doing this. I need to see it through. And that's sort of, I guess, my personality. And it was more of, I didn't want to let him down. I didn't want to displease him, and I wanted to actually see it happen. I said I was going to do it, and so I want to do it.
Yeah, well, those are powerful motivators, but it had to be hard if there was a part of you saying, this is just not the place that I'm meant to be. And so I'm thinking about, you have a new bike, and you've made an investment in learning to ride. You load up, you hit the road for an 8-month journey, as I recall, still a novice. And, and I suppose on some level you expect to return home this sort of passionate and skilled motorcyclist and adventurer. But that's not really how it went, is it?
No, not at all. No. Throughout the trip, I was always really anxious, and it got to the point where we would ride through the day. And by the end of the day, and we got to the hotel, I was just wiped. I think all of my energy went into riding, went into sort of keeping it all together, that by the end of the day, when we got to a nice site where we could explore and see new things, all I wanted to do was rest. And Greg just really didn't understand. He didn't understand was it that I was not in good enough shape or what it was. But looking back, obviously there was a lot of energy that was put into keeping it together. And this feeling that if I just rested more, then I'd have more energy the next day. And that completely goes against everything that I've learned since then. That idea that you need to give more to get more. You need to push through it. You need to gain the stamina. And that's something that I just didn't know at the time. And Greg didn't know how to deal with it either. For him, it was really, really difficult because for him, we were having the trip of a lifetime, or we were on potentially the trip of a lifetime. And I was just miserable.
Right.
I was getting through it, like I was a good enough rider to get through it. I did not like the off-road sections. I was really nervous about those. Sometimes Greg would ride them for me if there was a construction site or there was something that couldn't be avoided. But I got through it without any major incidents. And I continued to get better as we went along. But I never really felt like the motorcyclist. We met a few people along the way who were also traveling. And I would look at the women and I would think, wow, you really are a motorcyclist. You're doing it. It's great. And they would have this attitude and it was like this transformational experience that they were on in this trip. And I just didn't understand it. For me, I was just feeling really overwhelmed. And I wasn't enjoying it the way that they were. And it was clear. And so by the end of the trip, we got to Chile after 8 months and we got to Santiago. And we realized that we were going to stay in Santiago, and Greg was going to look for a job because he speaks fluent Spanish and had been there in the past. So he was going to look for a job and we were going to hang out there. But when we realized that we could only leave the bikes in the country for a certain amount of time and then we had to remove them so that we could keep the permits, we decided that really wasn't the way to go, that Greg wanted to have his bike with him and he didn't want to have to give it up for 6 months of the year. So when the option came, well, the only other opportunity we would have would be to go back to America. And that's what we decided. And for me, it was great. We had an 8-month trip and I was ready to go back and go back to something that I knew and that I felt comfortable with. I was really outside of my comfort zone for the majority of the trip. We had stopped in Mexico so that I could learn Spanish, and by the end, I was pretty good. So it wasn't really the language so much as the riding. I just wasn't a strong enough rider in my own view to feel comfortable with it. Every day, I would worry about what the road would be like ahead. I would be concerned that there was going to be a gravel section coming up, or that I'd have to make some sort of maneuver where I'd have to walk my bike. And walking my bike was always so tough, trying to back it up, and it was heavy. And we had a lot of load on the back because we were carrying all of our camping equipment. So there was a lot that went into it. And it was always the worry about what's going to come next. And I just didn't feel capable of handling it. So it wasn't the transformational experience that people talk about. And I think that one of the main reasons why was because I didn't accept this challenge. Accepting the challenge was something that I had heard maybe about a year ago in an audiobook when we were on a ride here in Guatemala, about being open to accepting what's coming next and really saying, yes, I am going to do this, and putting your mind towards it, and being able to stop if you need to, if there's something that needs to be discussed beforehand, so that you can get through it, and really just accepting what the challenge is. That's something that I realized that I never did with the motorcycle trip. Greg wanted to have this experience. I wanted to please him, and I wanted to see that relationship through. And so I said yes, but it was never wholeheartely. It was never my choice. And I always sort of felt like I was doing this more for him and for his enjoyment, which was complete nonsense, because I think if you were to ask Greg, he would have said that the trip was nowhere near what he would have wanted it to be because of the way that I was handling it. So it really is. There really is something to say about accepting the challenge and believing that you can do it and that you're in control. And I think that empowerment piece was really missing for when we started the trip versus how I'm feeling now.
Right. And I actually want to ask you about that in a little bit, but I'm back to that trip. as I recall, you got married when you got back, but I have to wonder, like, was this not hard on your relationship?
It was very difficult. And I remember when we were in Panama and we were getting ready to fly the bikes over and fly over to Bogota, he stopped me before we even bought the tickets. And we had a long conversation. And that's when he sort of looked at me and said, "You're not having fun. You're not the version that needs to be here to do this trip and enjoy it. And it's ruining the trip for me." And that's how he sort of positioned it. And he was just being honest. And he just wanted to be clear so that I would understand how he was feeling about it. And he said, "Look, I don't know if it makes sense for you to continue on. Maybe you want to go back to Canada and meet me at the end of the trip, or maybe you want to stay here and I can come back after." He gave a lot of ideas about what we could be doing. And like I said, I didn't want to. I wanted to continue. I wanted to see it through. And I didn't want to give him up at the time. So I pushed through it, and our trip in South America was quite a bit better than Central America. I was more relaxed, but then on the other hand, the roads were a lot more difficult for me. So there was that. But we had a lot of arguments and a lot of times where I would just prefer to relax in the hotel and he would end up going sightseeing. And it was only near the end where I finally was feeling more comfortable with riding that we were getting along a lot better by the end. And maybe it was because for me, I was looking at it like, well, the trip is almost over. And then that's it. Then we're not on a trip anymore and we can go back to normal life. And I think that sort of made me feel a little bit more comfortable, and made our relationship a lot better at the time, but it was still on shaky ground. And like you said, we did go back to the States after the trip to get married. We also did get married because I'm Canadian, Greg's American, and he was looking for a job in the States. And the only way we could really stay together is if I had a green card. And we still wanted to stay together. So that's what we decided to do. And had our wedding in Santa Barbara. But it was a difficult time because we had just come back to the States. Our bikes were on the boat coming back, and we didn't have them with us. So for me, it was I felt sort of more on even ground because we didn't have the bikes.
Right.
And Greg was a bit uncomfortable with it because he was waiting for his bike to come so that we could continue riding and enjoy the time that we had before we would have to start working again. So when we got married, things were good for me, but not so good for him. And eventually when the bikes came and Greg got a job in New Orleans, then we moved out to New Orleans and we had the bikes with us. But by that point, I have to say that I was feeling a lot more comfortable as a rider and was starting to feel a little bit more about what the women were talking about in the blogs and feel like I was a woman rider and that I did have something and it was a passion that I had.
Right. It sounds to me like through a lot of that process, you were super hard on yourself. Because, I mean, I've certainly known people who would have said, I learned to ride in Monrovia, and then I came back and I got my first big bike in, Los Angeles. And then I did this 8-month trip to the, southern tip of the Americas. And the fact that you did it at all, for a lot of people would be a confidence booster. And yet it sounds to me like nearly to the end, you were kind of beating yourself up about how this was going. Is that a fair statement? And if so, what do you think that says about you?
Yeah, that's right. I never really felt like I was a good enough rider. I always thought that there were people out there who were doing it better, and they obviously were. They were out there. They're better riders than I was. So who am I to say that I'm a rider? I think that's something maybe that I've carried forward as a kid, sort of like if if you're going to do something, then you have to be the best at it. And if you're not the best at it, well, then there's always going to be somebody out there who's going to tell you that you're not that. And that was, I think, what I grew up with, and that's what I carried forward here. So as much as from an outsider's perspective, it might look like I did these great things. We were in Liberia and we learned, and then we did this long trip and we moved and we rode our motorcycles everywhere. It might look like a lot, but to me, it still felt like I didn't have what I needed to feel confident in riding and confident in myself as well. Like I said, there were a lot of women that I ended up meeting along the way or was reading about, and it seemed like they really had it all together. And I just did not relate to that. And it took a long time until I could really say that I was a woman rider.
Right. Which is, man or woman, a rider's a rider. I think that's an extra freight that we tend to put on ourselves that we don't have to. I'm smiling a little bit as you talk because although I know this is far from the whole story, there's something so Canadian about the way you just explained that. I've always felt that if this country had a motto, it would be "Who do you think you are?" Or possibly "Don't get too big for your britches." There's something quintessentially Canadian about that. So
yes, exactly.
Right. So again, my mind is sort of still on the road with you, and I'm thinking if it was me, I might just get an Uber to the airport and go home and let Greg get this out of his system. But that's not actually what happened, and you don't give up, and you sort of grab this thing by the horns. And am I right in recalling that you actually got professional help to work this stuff through?
I did recently. In the past few years, yep, I've been able to speak to a therapist and talk through some of this, and it's been really helpful and eye-opening. And I think there was a lot of baggage between Greg and I, and him feeling like he didn't have the experience that he wanted, and me feeling really guilty about not being able to live up to that experience and why that experience wasn't as great as it should have been. And I think that a lot of it had to do with my upbringing and how I looked at things and sort of just feeling not feeling confident enough in myself and what I'm doing.
Yeah, interesting. So, I mean, it almost sounds as though the confrontation with the motorcycle kind of raised all this stuff for you. Would that be a fair
really
statement?
Did.
Yeah.
Yeah. The riding really brought everything up. It brought everything up in terms of how my husband was teaching me how to ride. It brought up how comfortable or uncomfortable I felt being in the spotlight. If you sort of look at the things that I've done, everything sort of leads me into being in the spotlight. And it's something that I've never felt comfortable with. I always sort of wanted to stay in the shadows. I wanted to be the supporting roles, never the lead. And I think that with the motorcycling, there's no way you can be in the supporting role. Especially in the places where I've been doing it, talking about learning in Monrovia or riding here, even in Guatemala or across Central and South America. There's riding on a big yellow bike like I'm riding. There's no way you can hide. You're on display, and it's just something that has taken me a while to really be okay with.
Yeah, I understand that. I think I told you in an email exchange that I had the same kind of experience with horses, and it in the end I was sort of defeated by that, but it led me to this, and so I really kind of connect with what you're saying, and I admire how you've gone at it. So let's go back to the moment when you are riding in Guatemala and you click over to the intercom to speak to Greg, and you say that you just heard something interesting on an audiobook, and that interesting thing was you don't grow from overcoming a challenge if you don't first accept that challenge as your own. And I think you said to him, "That's been me with motorcycling." So tell me about that moment, and tell me what that statement means to you.
So the statement came from an audiobook I was listening to. It was called, I think, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F. And it was talking about accepting a challenge. And the reason why I guess it was so important for me when I heard it was it really just clicked that I had never said yes to the trip. There were a lot of things in my life here that I didn't say yes to, and I felt pushed into, and I allowed myself to be pushed into, and not say yes or no to it. And it was just clear to me that our long motorcycle trip was a dream of Greg's that I wanted to see through for him, but it wasn't for me. I didn't accept the challenge. I didn't accept that I needed to be a good rider to be able to do this. I didn't accept that it was my choice to do this. And so when we were riding along, we were in Guatemala, we were going to the coast, and I knew that there was going to be a really sandy section for quite a while we were getting to the coast. And we stopped right before it started, and there was a gravel section, and I got a little bit spooked, and I told Greg we needed to pull over and stop. And we pulled over and we talked, and I said, look, I'm really anxious about this. I'm worried about going down, but look, I'm going to accept this challenge. I'm going to say, yes, I want to do this. And I'm going to get through it. And he said, okay. He goes, if you need to stop, let me know. We can always turn back. And he was really supportive, which was lovely. And so we got back on the bike and I rode to that gravel section. And by the end, I felt that feeling of accomplishment that I never felt on the whole long motorcycle trip. I felt like I did something for me, and I felt empowered by it. And that it just really made a lot of sense now with the women were saying and they were talking about and feeling that freedom and empowerment and strength. I finally, for once in my life, experienced it then. And that was right before the sandy section. And so I got off the bike again and we had a little celebration. And then I said, okay, I'm going to accept this next challenge. I know that it's going to be tough. I know the sand is very deep. We've got off-road tires, so we should be able to do this. And he said, if you go down, he goes, I'll be there to help you. If you need anything, just let me know on the intercom. I said, okay. So I get on the bike and we start going through the sand. It's nerve-wracking, but I'm practicing the skills that I had learned. And it was, I don't know, probably about an hour long on the sand. And I didn't once go down. Greg went down twice. I didn't once go down. By the end, I felt elated. It was just this amazing feeling that I had made it through that. And if it had been on the motorcycle trip and there was a tough section and I got through it, I never felt good about it because I always worried that I would have to either go back through it or there would be another thing up ahead. And so I could never really relax and say, oh my God, I did that. That was fantastic, because there was always going to be something worse coming. But in this case, because I accepted that challenge, it was this feeling that I could accept any challenge. The next thing that comes, I can say yes, or I could say no, and we could choose something else. And we decided to do that the next time. The next time we ended up riding down there, we decided to go on the paved route and take the boat across instead of riding through the sand. So right. I said, let's try something different, and I accepted that. But there's a big difference when you say yes to a challenge than when you feel pushed into it and just really anxious, and you're doing it for reasons that are not your own.
Right. What would you say? So you used the term breakthrough earlier, and I'm wondering what it is you broke through. What you would call what it is you've left behind.
I think it's the fear that I left behind more than anything. I think that the fear of making a mistake and looking silly is what I've left behind. I think that carried with me throughout my life. And being just very worried about what it looked like from the outside rather than what I was experiencing myself and what I wanted for me. And the breakthrough of that was being able to say, I'm accepting this challenge. And that means that I might go down. It means that I might end up bashing up my bike. It might mean that my bike goes down and I won't be able to pick it up and I might need help from somebody. I might look silly. All of those worries and that fear of looking silly, that sort of went away when I accepted it, and that that made the experience a lot more empowering and made me feel like I could do whatever I wanted to do. And it didn't matter who was watching, and it didn't matter what it looked like from the outside. It was all on me, and it was my choice.
Right. Right. And that ability to not be self-conscious actually bears on all kinds of motorcycling skills too, I think. Things like cornering and stuff like that. There is there's something kind of bigger there than just how we feel about how we look on a bike, which, frankly, is probably almost always cooler than we think. But, maybe that's a conversation for another day. You've called this the grand theory of motorcycling. What do you mean by that?
I think when I talk about the grand theory of motorcycling, for me, it's related to accepting the challenge. It means that by accepting it, you're able to do whatever you want to do. You get to say yes to something, like I said, that it's something that's just empowering to you, and it makes you feel like you're sort of free to do whatever you want. And so it's the sort of the grand theory of motorcycling in the sense that there's always going to be a challenge when you're riding. It's never going to be easy. There could be something in the road. There could be you could end up going on dirt. There could be anything that's there. But by accepting the challenge, you have the ability to get through it all.
Right. It reminds me of something. If I were to get a tattoo, which I do not currently have, the lead candidate for what I would have tattooed on my arm or something is a phrase, amor fati. I don't know if you've ever heard this. It's Latin, and it's some kind of warrior's code or something, but it literally means the love of one's fate. It's a sort of the highest level of acceptance. Does that resonate for you? You've talked about being at choice, but I just wonder whether this idea of acceptance is part of the package too.
Yeah, it definitely is. It's about putting sort of the responsibility on yourself rather on what else is going on. And by having the choice, it really clarifies what needs to be done and what you want to have done. And I think that sort of puts it really puts it all on you. And there's nobody else to blame. There's nobody else to say that what you're doing is wrong. It's on you. Right. And I think that choice really just makes you feel a lot stronger.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. The motorcyclists are great teachers of that, I think. So you told me that over the course of this journey, both the literal journey and the one that you've been on, kind of internally, you found that you weren't alone in having these kinds of anxieties and that you wished you'd sort of known that sooner. Can you talk a bit more about that? Tell me about the kinds of things people told you.
Some of the ones were really funny. When I would be reading about it, some of the women would say things like when they got to a stop, they would drop their bike. And I would read that and I'd be, how could you drop your bike at a stop sign? Like, what is it there that, like, how is that even possible? There's no way that I could have done that. And sure enough, when I was learning in Monrovia, I did my first solo ride to the hotel, which was, I don't know, probably about half an hour away. And I was just so excited that I got there in one piece. And the bike really felt really light. I ended up, getting off the bike without putting the kickstand down and just dropped it in front of probably about 10 workers who were working on the hotel. And, the woman who had written about it, I laughed at it. I was like, how was that possible? And she continued on and said, well, things like that happen. And I would just think, how was that possible? And then when it happened to me, it just made sense, like those things do happen. And if I had known that in advance, then, and I really understood what she was talking about, then I think I would have had a really different experience rather than feeling embarrassed at the time that I had dropped my bike in front of all these guys. Other things that I had read about what other women had talked about, there was a woman who had said, go at your own pace. And I thought I was going at my own pace, but it was only when I looked closer, I realized I was going at Greg's pace. And Greg and I are very different. He is very go, go, go. He can focus on something for 8 hours at a time without getting up. He's just a very different person than I am. For me, I prefer to do things in bursts, then take a bit of a break and then continue. And I find that's my ideal style of riding. I like to do maybe 45 minutes to an hour and then take a break and then continue on. Meanwhile, Greg sort of wants to power through it. And when I read what she had written about going at your own pace, it made so much more sense. I was forcing myself to live up to what Greg was doing, and it just was not my style. And the problem was that I didn't know what my style was. I hadn't had enough experience at the beginning when I learned to ride to know what I wanted. And if I had known those things, I think I would have done it in a different way. And Greg always talks about how he thinks that I'm a very capable person. So I think he sort of threw a lot at me, and I was able to juggle it very, very delicately. But if one thing were to happen, one of the balls would have dropped and then everything would have gone.
Right.
And it got to the point where he sort of thought that I could do anything. So he would push and I would just keep taking it on. But that's not what my style was. And now when I know what my style is I think if I had known about that sooner, it would have taken away a lot of the anxiety that I was feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, and that phrase, ride your own ride is probably the single most important piece of life-saving advice anybody can give another motorcyclist. I think riding with other people is tough for just that reason, but there's some basic existential truth in that, in what you're saying there. So you wrote an article for Adventure Motorcycle, which was, I thought, terrific. And in that article you said, and I quote here, the truth is that I never experienced that kind of existential transformation that people so commonly gush about in their blogs and evangelize in moto travel magazines. Which, to be honest, kind of stung a little because I tend to be a gusher, but I also haven't ridden the length of the Americas. But I guess my question is, how do you feel about riding now? I think you touched on this briefly earlier, but has there been some kind of transformation?
Yeah, I would definitely say there has been. If you were to ask me what my passion is now, it would be motorcycling, in a way that it never was, or I never even conceived that it could be when I first started. And I think the transformation has sort of happened over the last year. So I've been riding for about 6 years now, and I'm still on my 650. But now I ride with my German Shepherd on the back. And that has just given me a lot more confidence. And maybe part of it could be because there's not that many people who ride with their dogs, especially not a big 65-pound dog on the back. So if I do make a mistake or if there is an issue, then I don't feel so bad about it because I'm already doing something that's quite unique. And just having the length of experience that I now have on the bike, I'm just so much more confident about it. I can look around, I can experience. I'm not wiped at the end of the day when we go for rides. I now know what that feeling of freedom feels like. And it's only in this past year where I can say that I feel like that. And I think a big part of it was I did a off-road course here in Guatemala with a BMW instructor. And he sort of taught me the right way to ride on the dirt. And in Guatemala, there are a lot of dirt roads. So it was something that I needed to learn. And it was one of my biggest fears about riding, about getting into a spot where I was worried that I wouldn't be able to get out of because the road was bad or I didn't feel capable of riding through it. So by doing that off-road course, it just gave me this like renewed confidence that I have the skills now to ride through anything that I need to. And I don't have to be scared about it. If I go down, I go down. And if something happens to the bike, we can fix it. And that feeling that that I'm in charge of my own experience has really helped me feel that transformation that a lot of women and a lot of riders talk about when they talk about riding.
Yeah. Well, I'm super happy to hear that, obviously, especially given the investment that you've made in this. I'm interested that getting some additional training played a role, because I've found that one of the dividends of getting advanced rider training of any kind is that the powerful experience of being told that you're good enough by somebody who has no stake in your life, somebody who's not your father and not your husband or wife, and they're complete strangers who are subject matter experts, and they say, good job. And there's something I think you become a little taller after a day like that. Was that your experience with this off-road training?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there was another woman in the group and two men. So it was an intimate group, and I might have been, I don't know, maybe I was the weakest rider in the group, but by the end, I really felt good about myself. The instructor was praising. He was able to correct me in places where I didn't think that I needed correcting, but now it makes a whole lot more sense. And I came out of that experience feeling like I am a rider. I can ride off-road. I feel comfortable. Throw something at me, I can take it. And it was a really great experience. And it was sort of similar to the feeling that I got when we were in New Orleans. We lived in New Orleans, and I worked in Metairie, which was about, it wasn't a long ride. It was probably about half an hour in the morning. And I rode my motorcycle every day. Rain or shine, I would ride on the freeway to work with a bunch of guys in Metairie. And they were always so shocked when I would come in and I'd have my rain gear on because there was a torrential downpour on the freeway. And they would just look at me like, you're crazy. And I would just sort of feel like, no, I'm riding my motorcycle. I'm enjoying myself. I get to have this experience every day while you guys are coming in on your car and you're stuck in traffic, and I can weave in and out. Yeah. There was just something different about being able to do that. And I think that really helped me feel like a rider as well. Yeah.
Yep. Yep, I know that feeling. People say you're crazy, and you say, "No, I'm awesome, actually." And you'll just never know. I want to ask you about moxie. So that word kind of means determination and nerve, and I'm wondering if that's a coincidence. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if it's not a coincidence, I wonder what this dog means to you. Is it a she or a he? I'm sorry, I don't know that.
It's a she. It's a she.
Right, it's a she. So is she an alter ego?
So let me back up a second. So my motorcycle, Greg and I wanted to name our motorcycles. My motorcycle is actually named Moxie Thumper because of the single cylinder. And I thought it only made sense that my bike would be a Moxie in the sense that as an alter ego, I felt like she needed to show that she had balls. And so I liked the name Moxie. And then when my German Shepherd came around, I thought, what better name than to give her than Moxie? So that's how that happened.
Right. And is that who she is?
Yes, definitely. She is fearless. She has boundless energy. And she tests us every day and makes us sort of step outside ourselves in our comfort zone in the same way my bike does. And it's just an amazing experience, and I'm so glad that we have her.
Yeah, I can see that. I follow you on Instagram, and I see lots of pictures of her, and she just seems like 100% alive and in the moment all the time. And that's got to be amazing energy to be around. How is she taken to riding on the back of your bike?
She's great. She's a trooper. She's up for anything. So Greg, when we first got Moxie as a puppy, one of the concerns was how we were going to take her on the motorcycles, because we've only got our motorcycles. We don't have a car out here in Guatemala. So the idea sort of came up when we went on a trip without her. We left her behind and had somebody take care of her. And when we left her, we sort of felt like a piece of our family was missing. So when we were riding, we were talking on the communicators, and I was saying this to Greg that I was feeling a little sad that we left her behind, and it would have been so great if we could take her along. And that prompted a whole discussion and months of work of creating a carrier. It first started with the idea that, well, maybe we should have a trailer. Let's look about trailers. So we looked online about the trailers. And there's only a few companies that make them for dogs, but then none of them that would make it for my bike. And I didn't really want a trailer because it sort of takes away from sort of the motorcycling in the same way I sort of feel like the sidecar does. The reason why I like my motorcycle is because it allows us to go to places that maybe a car couldn't reach, or sort of the roads that are less taken. So when we looked online about carriers that we could have on the back of the bike, there was nothing for a big dog like mine, for my bike or for anything sort of close to my bike that we could alter. There were some out there that are for maybe 30-pound dogs. There's a few companies that make them, but nothing that I saw that would make sense, or that wasn't under, I don't know, a few $1,000s. So Greg was working at a metal shop and started creating some plans about what he wanted, or what he thought would work. And the first idea was, there were a lot of pizza delivery motos that are here in Guatemala that have the big pizza delivery box on the back. And we thought, oh yeah, Moxie could sit in that, and that'd be great. So we started with that idea, sort of a big open box on the back. And we created it. It was aluminum. It was really well built. And then we put it on there, and we realized how heavy that was. There's no way. At the time, Moxie was probably about 40 pounds, and we're thinking, she could turn out to be like a 70, 80-pound dog. There's no way that I'll be able to carry all of that weight and still feel comfortable riding my bike.
Right.
So we went to the next step, and I think we went through 3 or 4 different versions of the carrier to get to what we got to now, which is sort of an open metal framed carrier that's upholstered here. And it sort of connects to the chassis. And it's really strong and durable. And it allows Moxie to leap up. She lays down and lays on the passenger seat. So all of the weight is lower down, which was something that was important to me because it's a lot easier to ride when the weight is lower down. And she's harnessed in the front and the back. So she can't jump out when she sees a cow or she sees a cat running by. She just loves it. You tell her saddle up and she'll leap right up there. And then at the end, dismount and she'll jump down. She's just an amazing dog like that. And when she's on the back with me, she's always active. She never sleeps. She's looking on either side of me to see what's coming. She smells a cow a mile away and is looking for it until we pass it, and then she sees it and she's so excited. And it's just a fun experience, and it makes traveling for me that much more exciting. There's obviously a lot of things that we can't do, especially here in Guatemala, in terms of you can't go to the Mayan ruins with the dog, or you can't bring the dog into certain areas. But it's really helped expand how we travel and what we do. So now we are more likely to camp out. We're more likely to go to some of the parks, to see some of the natural wonders instead of going to see something like a museum where we couldn't bring her. So she's created some barriers, but she's also opened us up to a lot of other things.
Right. Well, it sounds to me like you've kind of backed into a huge commitment to motorcycling as a lifestyle, actually, which is, considering where you started, is kind of interesting. And do you have plans to commercialize this thing?
We thought about it at the very beginning. We've had a lot of interest in people wondering how they could bring their dog, and they see our carrier and they sort of ask for the design, and we shared the design. We didn't think that there was a big enough market for this type of travel. I know everywhere, it's obviously not DOT certified. Out here, it's a lot easier to make and a lot cheaper to make than it would be somewhere in the States. But no, when people ask about it, we share the design so that we'd love to see other people do it as well. But the reason why we have it and why we promote it, it's more so that we can promote our dog product business rather than for the carrier itself, which is called the K9 Moto Cockpit. Greg's naming.
Nice. So, I mean, this is, I guess, kind of a lame question, I suppose, but there's no doubt in my mind that there are people out there listening to this who are going to identify with some of the things that you've been through and some of the feelings that you've had, and maybe not been vocal about it themselves or even necessarily honest with themselves about it. But nonetheless, there are going to be people out there, I think, who share elements of the experience that you've been through. And I'm wondering if you were to speak directly to them, what you would tell them you learned here.
I think the first thing that I would say is to take it easy on yourself. You don't need to be perfect, and mistakes are so important for you to learn. And that's something that it took me a long time to learn, that it was okay to make a mistake and that there was value in making a mistake. And when it comes to riding, what better way to learn than to realize that you shouldn't speed onto gravel, or that you should make sure that your kickstand is down when you get off the bike. Those mistakes that you make that might make you feel silly or make you feel anxious, it's just a moment in time, and it's something that you can learn from. So I would say, don't be so hard on yourself. Take it easy, and take time to enjoy the experience. And if you're anxious, stop and think it through and figure out what it is that's making you anxious, instead of riding when you're feeling worked up or you're anxious. I did that at the beginning a lot of the time, and it just ruined the whole experience. And it made me feel bad about myself that I wasn't enjoying it more. And if I had just stopped to sort of acknowledge, why was I feeling so anxious about it? Is it because there are people watching? Is it because I'm unsure about the road? And sort of talk it through and think about, well, what's the worst that could happen? And that really helps you feel a bit more confident about what you're doing, and sort of gives you something practical to focus on if you're feeling anxious.
Yeah. I think in some respects, accepting that it's a process is the hardest thing for riders that that don't have years and years of experience. You think that you begin as someone who can't ride, and that at some point you'll be someone who can ride, and actually it never ends, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. Yeah, you're always learning something new, and it's this great experience once you get to that point where you're not so anxious about getting on the bike,
right?
Because there's so many new things out there to explore. But it does take time to get to that point. But if you stick with it, you will get there.
Do you have any regrets about all this?
I regret that I didn't spend more time learning before we went on the trip. If Greg and I take trips now when we can around Central America, we often go into Mexico. And those trips are just amazing, like it's such a great experience, and I feel comfortable and I'm excited, and there's things to see and do, in a way that on our 8-month motorcycle trip, where we basically blew our savings on everything. And I didn't even come close to that experience that I have now. And I think if I spent more time practicing, if I just had more experience under my belt before taking on that trip, and also acknowledging some of these things about making mistakes and why I'm feeling anxious. If I acknowledged that from the beginning, I think that trip would have been a lot better. So I do regret that we sort of rushed into it in that sense. But it's on the horizon for us. We plan to do another one. So it wasn't our last chance. It might not be an 8-month trip. It might be something less. But we definitely are going to continue to do trips and do a longer trip in the future. Right. So I'll have a chance to sort of redeem myself and see all of the things that I didn't get a chance to see when we came through the first time, because I was so worked up.
Yep, I understand. And in fact, that was going to be my next question is sort of, what's next for you guys? I think you mentioned to me that you're only in Guatemala for a couple of years, and then what happens? Do you move back to LA or where's the next road?
So right now we're busy trying to build our rough on the road business. And that's keeping us here because we're working with the artisans, and we're being on the ground is obviously a lot easier for us to get our products sorted, and then we ship them to the States. So we've been here for about 2.5 years. And based on my visa status in the States, eventually we're going to have to go back. I think we probably have another 2.5 years that we can be out of the country before we need to move back to the States. So hopefully we get to stay out here for another 3 years. And then we'll see. This will probably be the place that we've stayed the longest. Both of us together and separately. We're not ones for sort of staying put. But we've really found a home here in Guatemala. We really enjoy it. We live right by a lake that's surrounded by volcanoes. We have motorcycle riders that pass through when they're doing their north to south or south to north trips, and we invite them to come over. And we keep track of them online, and we've got a spare room here for anybody who's passing through and needs a place to stay or fix their bike in the yard here. We enjoy it. We enjoy our own rides, and we enjoy meeting other people here. So we're happy where we are right now, but we'll see what happens in the next years.
Yeah. That's fantastic. I mean, what you're describing is about as close to freedom as I can imagine. And that's the thing that everybody who throws a leg over a motorcycle is dreaming of. I mean, you kind of have won the grand prize here in a way. Does it feel like that to you?
Now it really does. Like looking back and seeing how far we've come and the places that we've lived in the past. And I feel like right now we sort of have the whole package. Like we've got each other. We are living in this wonderful place. We have our motorcycles and there's wonderful roads to ride here and fun things to explore. I've got the dog that keeps me happy and busy, and we can travel with her. And we work remotely here in Guatemala, so it's easy for us to be wherever we need to be and travel and work from a hotel if we're going to go on a longer trip. So we have a pretty great life here. And it's taken us a while to get here, but we're here now, and we love to share it with people whenever they're coming through. So I think that it's something that we just enjoy sharing it and having people come.
That's fantastic. Jess, I know you weren't looking to make yourself the center of this story, so I really appreciate you speaking with me about it. I mean, I'm always grateful to people who come on the show, but a little more than usual here because because I know it's not your jam to be a center stage. But as I said earlier, I have a feeling that a few riders listening to this are going to see themselves in what you've been through, or going to see someone they ride with in what they've been through, and that's a great gift that you're giving them. So thank you. Thanks for being on the show, and thanks for being so honest.
No, thank you for having me. If I can help anybody out with my story, I'm just glad that I could.
Well, I'm sure you will. Normally at this point in the interview, I'm like, well, so maybe we'll ride together someday and I'll see you out there. But if you're in Guatemala, the odds are slightly longer that might be the case. But it would be fun to meet anyway someday. So let's stay in touch, and I'll make sure that I include all of your contact information on the show notes so that people can follow what you guys are up to and maybe get to know your business a little bit and meet Moxie.
Yeah, that'd be perfect. Yeah, if anybody is passing through Guatemala, they have a place to stay. We love having visitors, so feel free to reach out. We'd love to see you all. And you too, Bruce, when you come riding down here, you've got a place to stay.
I don't know if you want that much anxiety in your life. I'm like the most anxious person you've ever met. So, let's see. I'll take that as a challenge. Anyway, so again, thank you, and take care. We'll hopefully speak again soon.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you very much, Bruce.
Well, depending on where you are in your motorcycle life, Jess's story could be about a lot of things. Fear, love, commitment, maybe even especially what motorcycles can teach us about ourselves. But here's the thing that I think applies to every rider, no matter who you are. and I'll illustrate it with an embarrassing story of my own. I consider myself a decent intermediate rider. I've been doing this for a few years. I have tens of thousands of miles under my belt without incident. I update my training regularly, and I can always get a bike down the road safely, if not necessarily in a blaze of glory. To me, that's been an achievement. Then, this past October, I found myself doing media test rides at the AIM Expo motorcycle show in Las Vegas. I was pretty excited to be there, as you can imagine, and the first few rides were great, until I got to the Yamaha tent, where I was curious about their XSR 700. Other than the fact that everyone had chosen a larger bike, nothing about the test group I was in seemed remarkable. Half of them weren't even wearing jackets and boots. But Yamaha, for reasons best known to itself, had created a test loop that was nearly all elevated multi-lane freeway. And as soon as we hit the on-ramp, the rest of the group left me for dead, confidently proceeding straight to the fast lane through midday traffic at 75 miles an hour and disappearing into the distance. Well, I'm not going to make any excuses here. I suddenly felt a bit over my head, and it rattled me. So I finished that ride at my own pace, in the reluctant company of the sweeprider, parked my bike, and then did my best to melt into the crowd. I was pretty disappointed with myself, and it felt like a bit of a setback. But what I realized as I listened to Jess was that my reaction was really just a bruised ego, and that I had missed the point entirely. The extraordinary effort and courage that she put into becoming a rider reminds us all, I think, that motorcycling isn't simply an acquired skill, like boiling an egg or making a martini. It's a process, and it's a process that doesn't really end until you park your bike for the last time. For some riders, it may be more of a fight than it is for others, but the prize is the same: to one day make that comfort zone as big as the world itself. And in the meantime, if you have one at all, it just means you're winning. Well, I've heard countless riders talk about how it's the journey and not the destination. I used to think they were talking about the scenery. I think now I'm finally starting to get it. Well, thanks for listening. You'll find show notes for this episode at thismotorcyclelife.com, and I'll include everything you need to know about following the adventures of Jess, Greg, and Moxie. That's also how you can reach me if you have questions, comments, or suggestions. Emailing me at thismotorcyclelife@gmail.com works too, and every email gets an answer. You can also follow me on Instagram, where I like to post pictures of bikes I find on the street, and where you can follow a lot of the people I've interviewed for this podcast, including Jess Stone. Well, this episode's playlist recommendation features another motorcycle riding musician. Matt Epp hails from Winnipeg, Manitoba. Motorcycles are how I found him on Instagram, where this singer-songwriter describes himself as a moto troubadour, which looks like a fine way to live your life. It would be hard to pick one track that defines Matt Epp, but it was easy to pick one that captured the spirit of this episode. It's called Learning to Lose Control. You can buy it wherever you like to get your music. And in the meantime, keep staying alive out there.
I could give it all up, give it all back, and it was mine, I know. As I came, it would go, learning my lessons in time. Gave up the child